My grandfather taught me to read the glass before he taught me to read the alphabet, and the first word I ever knew in any language was the Sevren word for impression. He did not call it that. He called it the print, the way you might call a thing pressed into wax a print. And for most of my childhood, I believed the reliquary of forms was nothing more grand than a very old, very large mold left behind by something that had once stopped here and not bothered to clean up after itself. That is the gift of being raised inside a wonder. You stop seeing it as a wonder. It becomes the place you live, the place your father worked, the cold smell of the upper galleries, the hum that you only notice on the rare nights it stops. I am the seventh warden of my line to tend the reliquary above Tessivar, and I will most likely be the last, because after what happened here, I do not think the work I was trained for will mean the same thing to the people who come after me. That is fine. Some doors, once you have walked through them, are not meant to be walked through twice. Let me tell it plainly, the way my grandfather told things, because the official record will dress it in committee language, and the broadcasts already have it half wrong. I was on the high gallery the morning the sky changed. It was the cold season, the season when the wind comes down off the northern shelf, and the whole bluff above the city goes hard and bright. And I had gone up before light to check the seventh array, because the hum had thinned in the night, and a thin hum means a fouled coupling somewhere in the deep racks. I had my coat on and my hands full of test leads, and I was not thinking about anything except whether I would have to send for a crew or could clear the fault myself before the day shift came up the road from Tessivar. Then the morning star moved. That is what it looked like at first, a bright point that should have held still and did not. I have watched the sky my whole life from this gallery, and I knew every fixed light in it, and this one slid. Then it brightened. Then it was not one point but a long seam of points, a line drawn across the high blue, and the line thickened as I watched until I could see that it was not stars at all but hulls, catching the sun before the sun had reached the ground, hundreds of them, descending in the slow, contemptuous way that only a thing certain of welcome descends. I did not run. I want that on the record, not because it makes me brave, but because it tells you something about how we had been raised on this bluff. I stood and I watched the Sevren come back, and the first feeling I had was not fear. It was recognition. I had spent my life inside the print they left of our world, and now the hand that made the print had returned to compare it against the original, and some small, cold, professional part of me thought only this: they are going to be disappointed. They have kept a copy, we have kept the truth. You have to understand what they were, because the broadcasts will tell you they were machines, and that is a child's word for it, the way a child calls a deep-sea thing a fish. The Sevren were a pattern people, somewhere far back, so far back that even their own oldest forms could not say when they had stopped being born and started being copied. They had learned to take the full impression of a living thing, body and habit and the shape of its thought, and to press that impression into new matter, and a Sevren was not a creature so much as the latest pressing of a pattern that had been pressed and pressed again across more years than our species had been upright. They did not conquer worlds the way the old empires of our histories conquered. They surveyed them. They came to a living world, and they took its impression, every form on it, root and beast and thinking thing, and they stored that impression in their archives, and then they left, and the world did not always know it had been visited. And then, when their own patterns wore thin, when the copies of copies had drifted and degraded until a Sevren could no longer hold a clean shape, they returned to one of their surveyed worlds and they harvested it. They built themselves new from the patterns they had filed away. The living world was raw material. The impression was the inventory. They had taken our impression 60,000 years ago. I know the number to the year because the number is written into the reliquary itself, into the slow decay of certain markers in the deep racks that my line has measured across 7 generations. 60,000 years ago, a Sevren survey vessel had come to a quiet, frank, half-wild Earth, and it had pressed the full impression of our world into the great glass array, and then it had done a thing it had never meant to do. It had failed to leave. We do not know why. My grandfather had 100 theories and I have 100 more and none of them matter. What matters is that the survey vessel died here on this bluff 60,000 years before I was born, and its crew died with it, and the only thing that survived was the glass, the great pattern array, half buried, humming faintly to itself, holding the complete impression of an Earth that no longer existed. And we found it. Not the city, not the wardens, but the people who came before all of that, the ones who were still wearing skins against the cold. They found a humming wonder in the hillside and they did not break it. That is the part I think about most. They did not break it. They learned slowly, across more generations than I can count, that the wonder was a kind of memory, and they began the work that my line would inherit. They began to keep it. So when I say the Sevren came back to compare their print against the original, I am telling you the literal truth. They had filed our impression away 60,000 years ago against the day they would need new matter, and now, somewhere out in the long dark, their patterns had worn thin enough that they needed us, and they had come to harvest the world they had catalogued. They expected to find what every harvester expects to find: a living larder. A frightened, half-wild world, perhaps a little changed by 60,000 years of weather, but fundamentally the thing they had filed. Raw material that did not know it was raw material. What they found instead was Tessivar. Let me tell you about Tessivar, so you understand what the Sevren saw when their long line of hulls came down through the morning. The city fills the whole basin below the bluff and climbs the far slopes and does not stop where the eye stops. Its towers are not towers in the old sense. They are grown things, lattices of bound carbon and living alloy that flex in the wind and shrug off the lightning, and the tallest of them stand higher than the clouds that morning sat in. Between the towers run the rail veins, and above them, that day as every day, hung the city's own watch. The long defense platforms that we do not think of as warships because they never move and never fire, the way you do not think of the foundation of your house as a thing that holds you up. And higher than all of it, in the cold, clean upper air, the orbital ring caught the early sun and threw it back down across the basin, so that the whole city woke each morning into a second, gentler dawn of its own making. We did not build Tessivar to frighten anyone. That is the thing the Sevren could not have understood descending. We built it because 60,000 years is a long time to be afraid, and somewhere in that long time we stopped being afraid and started being ready, and a people who are ready build differently than a people who are afraid. A frightened people builds walls. A ready people builds a world it would not mind defending, and then quietly makes sure it can. We had not spent 60,000 years waiting for the Sevren. We had spent the first 1,000 not even knowing they would come. But we had spent all of it keeping the glass, and keeping the glass had taught us, generation by generation, exactly what the Sevren were, exactly what they did, and exactly what they would one day come back for. You cannot tend a thing for 60,000 years and not learn to read it. And we had read, in the deep racks of the reliquary of forms, the entire shape of the people who would one day return to harvest us. That is the part I need you to sit with. We did not study the Sevren from the outside, the way you study an enemy across a border. We held their own work in our hands. The glass was their array, their technology, their method of pressing a world into memory, and across 60,000 years we had not only learned to keep it from decaying, we had learned to read it, and then to write it, and then, in the last several thousand years, to understand the one thing about themselves the Sevren had lost. But I am ahead of the morning. Let me come back to the morning. The first hail came down a little after the hulls broke through the cloud layer. It came on every band at once, which is itself a kind of arrogance, the way a man who owns a house does not knock. It came in the Sevren tongue, the pressed, layered tongue that I had been hearing in my head since before I could read, and I understood it on the gallery before the city's translators had finished rendering it for everyone below. It said, more or less, what a harvester says to a larder. It named us by the name they had filed us under 60,000 years ago, a name that meant, as near as I can put it, the soft world, the warm world, the world of brief forms. and it told us without threat, without anger, with the flat courtesy of a thing that has done this 1,000 times, to be still, to hold our shapes. The survey was complete. The harvest would not take long. There was no need for the larder to thrash. I have thought a great deal since that morning about how the city did not thrash. There was no panic in Tessivar. I have heard from people in other cities that there was some panic elsewhere, in places that had not lived under the bluff, that did not have a reliquary on the hill above them, that knew the old story only as a story. I do not blame them. But Tessivar had been raised in the long shadow of the glass, and Tessivar, when the harvesters came down out of the morning nomming it a larder, did the most frightening thing a larder can do. It went about its business. The rail veins ran. The morning shifts climbed the road up the bluff to relieve me, and they came up calm with their coffee, looking at the descending hulls the way you look at weather. One of them, a young coupling tech named Sella, whom I had trained myself, reached the gallery, set down her kit, looked up at 400 Sevren hulls filling the sky, and said to me, "The hum thinned in the night. Did you find the fault?" That is the moment I knew we would be all right. Not because we were unafraid. We were afraid. But we had been afraid for 60,000 years and had turned the fear into something with a job to do, and a people who can ask about a fouled coupling under a sky full of harvesters is a people who has already won the only fight that matters, which is the fight not to become what frightens you. I told Sella I had not found the fault. We went and found it together, while the Sevren descended, because the seventh array had to be clean for what was coming, though I did not yet know exactly what was coming, only that the reliquary would be at the center of it. They landed on the bluff. Of course they did. They came down all around the reliquary, hundreds of them at first, and then it seemed like thousands, hulls settling onto the hard, cold ground in a wide ring with the glass at its center, ramps lowering, and out of them came the Sevren themselves, and I will tell you what 60,000 years had done to them, because it is the whole of the matter. They were beautiful and they were wrong. Each one wore a form pressed from some world they had harvested across the long dark, and so no two were alike. There were tall ones built on the bones of some six-limbed thing, and low, broad ones that moved like the tide coming in, and slender, bright ones that I think had once been pressed from something that flew. They carried weapons, and they carried themselves like soldiers, like a thing that had come to do work it had done many times. But they were wrong, and I could see it from the gallery, and it took me a moment to understand what I was seeing, and when I understood it my breath went out of me, because I had read about it in the deep racks but I had never seen it. They were degraded. Every one of them was a copy of a copy of a copy, pressed and pressed across more years than their own oldest record could hold, and the pressing had drifted. Their forms did not quite close. A limb did not quite match its fellow. A face held its shape, and then, at the edges, blurred, the way a word copied by hand 1,000 times loses the memory of how it was first written. They moved beautifully and they moved wrong, and as the ring of them tightened around the reliquary I understood, the way you understand a thing all at once after a lifetime of half understanding it, why they had come back. It was not only that their patterns had worn thin, it was that they had lost the master. Here is the thing the deep racks had taught my line, the thing we had kept for 60,000 years not knowing if it would ever matter. A copyist people lives or dies by its master pattern, the first pressing, the unbroken original from which all later pressings descend. As long as you hold the master, every drift can be corrected. You can always go back to the source and press a clean copy, but if you lose the master, you are lost. Every copy you make from then on is a copy of a drifted copy, and the drift compounds, generation upon generation. And you spend the rest of your existence chasing fresh patterns from living worlds to paper over a degradation you can never truly fix, because the thing you have actually lost is not matter. It is yourself, the clean memory of what you were. The Sevren had lost their master pattern. Somewhere in the long dark, in some catastrophe their own records only hinted at, the great original archive had fallen, and with it the unbroken first pressing of the Sevren themselves. And ever since they had been a people copying themselves from corruption, drifting further from their own true shape with every generation, harvesting world after world for fresh matter to slow a decay. They did not have the means to stop. They came to us a degraded people. They came to us, though they did not know it, as the most pitiable thing in the galaxy, a people who had forgotten the shape of their own faces. And we held it. That is what the reliquary of forms is. That is the secret my line has kept on this bluff for 60,000 years without fully understanding what we kept. When the Sevren survey vessel came here and pressed the impression of our world into the glass, it did something else, something automatic, something I do not think the dying crew even intended. The array, in pressing our world, also recorded itself. It kept the full impression of its own makers, of the Sevren who operated it, pressed clean and complete into the deepest racks of the glass on the very day they arrived, before 60,000 years of degradation, before the drift, before the loss of their master archive out in the dark. The deepest racks of the reliquary held the unbroken original pattern of the Sevren people. We had the master they had lost. We had held it for 60,000 years, in the cold galleries above Tessivar, tending it, measuring its slow markers, keeping it clean, my grandfather and his grandfather and 7 generations of wardens before me. Keeping a thing we did not know was the lost soul of the people who would one day return to eat us. I did not know it that morning either, not all of it. I knew the deep racks held a Sevren impression. Every warden knows that. We had always assumed it was a survey artifact, a self-record, a curiosity. It was the conservatory in Tessivar, the long, quiet institution that had grown up alongside my line to study what we kept, that had pieced together over the last several thousand years what the deep impression truly was, and what it meant, and they had told only a very few, because a thing like that is not a thing you broadcast. I learned the whole of it that morning in the 3rd hour, when the conservatory's people came up the bluff road through the ring of landed hulls under a flag of parley, that the Sevren did not understand and did not honor and did not, in the end, need to. And they came to the gallery, and they told me what I was standing on top of. I was standing on top of the Sevren, the true ones, the unbroken first pressing of an entire people, held clean for 60,000 years while the living copies drifted toward ruin in the dark. The thing they needed and could never make again. The thing that could remake them whole. The thing that could, in the wrong hands with the wrong intent, also be deleted, and with it the master that was the only hope the species had of ever being itself again. We held the unmaking and the remaking of an entire people in the deep racks of a hillside, and the people themselves were standing in a ring around us, nomming us a larder, certain we were soft and warm and brief. I want to tell you what we did with that, because it is the only part of this that I am proud of, and I am proud of it the way you are proud of a thing your whole people did, and you happen to be standing in the room for. The Sevren commander came up onto the reliquary itself in the 4th hour. They had grown impatient with the larder's stillness. A larder that does not thrash and does not flee and does not beg is an unfamiliar thing to a harvester, and unfamiliarity, even in a thing as old and certain as the Sevren, breeds a kind of caution. So the commander came up to see the array its long-dead survey crew had left behind, perhaps to harvest from it, perhaps only to understand why the soft world stood so still. It came up the gallery stairs in a form pressed, I think, from some long-armed climbing thing, tall and beautiful and wrong at the edges, and it stood on my gallery in the cold northern wind, and it looked at the glass for a long time, and I stood beside the conservatory people, and I watched a degraded god look at the master it had lost without knowing what it was looking at. And then it knew. I will never forget the moment it knew. The glass, you see, does not only store. It is an array. It resonates. A pattern held in it answers a pattern that comes near it. And the commander standing on the gallery was a Sevren pattern, drifted and degraded but Sevren, and the deep racks beneath us held the unbroken Sevren master, and across 60,000 years, the two patterns recognized each other the way the original of a thing recognizes its own ruined copy. The hum of the array changed. I felt it through the floor before I heard it. The seventh array, the one Sella and I had cleared that morning, the one that ran the deepest, began to sing, and the song was the commander's own true name, the unbroken shape of the thing it had been before 60,000 years of drift, called up out of the deep racks and offered back to it across the cold air. The commander went very still, stiller than a living thing goes. It stood on my gallery and it heard, for the first time in its long degraded existence, the clean original of itself, the shape it had been on the day its makers were makers, before the master was lost, before the long hunger, before it became a thing that ate worlds to remember its own face. And then it did a thing that I do not have a Sevren word for and do not have a human one either. It knelt, not in surrender. The conservatory people argued about it for weeks afterward and never agreed, but I was there and I will tell you what I think it was. I think it was grief. I think it was a creature hearing, after an eternity of forgetting, exactly how much it had lost, and the only thing a body can do with a grief that sighs is fold. The harvest stopped that hour, not because we threatened them. We never threatened them. We did not fire a shot the whole time, and the long platforms over Tessivar never moved, and the orbital ring threw down its gentle second on the next morning the same as every morning. The harvest stopped because the harvesters had come to a larder and found, instead, the lost soul of their own people, kept clean by the very world they had filed away as raw material. And you cannot eat the thing that is holding your true face out to you across the cold. You can only stand there and understand what you had become and what was being offered. Because we offered it. That is the cost, and that is the choice, and I have turned it over every night since, and I would not change it, but I will not pretend it was a small thing or an easy one. We held the unmaking of the Sevren in the deep racks. We could have deleted the master. Every warden knows the protocols. I will not pretend I did not stand on the gallery in the fourth hour and feel the weight of the unmaking under my feet and understand, with a clarity that frightened me, that I was standing on a switch that could end a species that had come to end us, and that no one in the galaxy would ever have known or blamed us. A people that comes to harvest you, and that you can erase with a sequence you have known since childhood, with nothing to stop you and every reason to do it. That is a temptation, and anyone who tells you it is not has never stood on that switch. We did not delete the master. We did something that took us 60,000 years to become capable of, and I do not mean technically capable, I mean the other kind, the kind that is harder. We pressed them clean. The conservatory had been ready for this, I learned, for longer than I had been alive. They had not known the Sevren would come in my lifetime, but they had known they would come, and they had spent the last several thousand years not preparing a weapon but preparing a gift, because that is the difference between a frightened people and a ready one, and we had stopped being frightened a long time ago. They had learned to write the glass, not only to read it. They had built, slowly, carefully, a way to take the unbroken master in the deep racks and press from it a clean original, and to offer that clean pressing to the degraded copies that stood in a ring around our hill, so that the Sevren could be remade from their own true source for the first time in longer than their oldest record could hold. We gave them back themselves. It took the rest of the cold season. The Sevren, who had come to harvest a world, stayed instead to be made whole by it, and the strangeness of that never left me the whole time it was happening. They sent their degraded forms up onto the bluff in long, quiet lines, and the glass sang each of them its true name, and one by one they walked into the deep galleries drifted and beautiful and wrong, and one by one they came out clean, not the same forms. The master was the master, the original Sevren shape, and what came out of the galleries was the people they had been before they ever became copyists, before they ever ate a world, the first true Sevren pressed clean from the original we had kept for them. They came out and they did not know their own hands. I watched 1,000 of them learn their own faces. There is no sight like it, and I do not expect to see its equal. And here is the part the broadcasts cannot seem to hold, the part I most want set down right. We did not have to do it. The remaking did not save Tessivar. Tessivar was never in danger, not really, not with the platforms over it and the ring above it and 60,000 years of readiness under it. We could have stood on our hill, holding the unmaking under our feet, and simply let the harvesters understand they could not harvest us, and they would have left, drifted and degraded and hungry, to die slowly in the long dark as they had been dying for an age. That would have been justice of a kind. That would have been safe. No one would have called it cruel. We chose the other thing. We chose to spend the readiness we had built across 60,000 years, not on ending a people that had come to end us, and not even on the cold mercy of letting them leave hungry, but on the hardest discipline of all, which is to give an enemy back the thing that makes them more than an enemy. We gave them back their true selves, and we asked nothing for it, no tribute, no oath, no surrender, because a gift with a price on it is not a gift, it is a leash. And we had not kept the master of an entire people clean for 60,000 years in order to put a leash on it. We had kept it because keeping is what we do. We are the wardens. We keep the things that other people lose. It turned out the thing this world had been keeping, without knowing it, was the soul of the people who would come to eat us. And when they came, we did the only thing a warden can do with a thing entrusted to its keeping. We gave it back to its owner whole. The commander came to my gallery on the last morning before they left. It wore the clean form now, the true Sevren shape, and it was a strange and quiet thing to see, a creature that had knelt in grief on my gallery a season before standing now in its own true face, whole for the first time in an age. It did not speak in the harvester's flat courtesy. It spoke slowly, choosing, the way you speak when the old words do not fit the new self, and what it said I have carried with me every day since. It said that it had surveyed 900 worlds across the long dark, and harvested 211 of them, and that it had filed every one of them away as matter, soft and warm and brief, and that in all of that long degraded existence, it had never once been the thing that was kept. It had been the one who came and took the impression and left, and the worlds it surveyed had been the ones who were taken. It had not known, until this cold season on this bluff, that a world could keep instead of be kept, that a world could hold the truest part of you across an age of dark and hand it back to you in the morning and ask for nothing. It said it did not have a word for what we were, in any of the 900 tongues it carried. And then it said the thing I have said above my grandfather's name in the warden's record, the thing I want left after I am gone. It said, we came to find out what was left of you. We did not know that you were the ones keeping what was left of us. Then the Sevren went up off the bluff in their clean, true forms, 400 hulls rising back through the cold morning, and they did not name us a larder, and they did not threaten the platforms, and they did not, in the end, harvest a single thing, and the last of them passed up through the cloud layer a little after the sun had reached the ground, and the morning star that was not a star slid back to where it had come from and then was gone. Sella came up the bluff road that morning with her coffee, the way she had the first morning, and she set down her kit and looked at the empty sky and then at the glass, still humming its low, clean hum, and she said, "You'll want to check the 7th array. It ran deep all season. There'll be a fault somewhere." There was. We found it together, the way we found the first one, and we cleared it, and the hum came back full and even. And the reliquary of form stood on its cold bluff above Tessivar holding, in its deep racks, the impression of a world that no longer existed, and beside it, the place where the soul of another people had been kept and given back. I am the 7th warden of my line, and I have decided I do not mind being the last of the old kind, because the work has changed now, and it should. We are not just keeping a memory of what we were anymore. The galaxy knows what is on this bluff now. The galaxy knows there is a world that kept a stranger's true face clean for 60,000 years and handed it back without a price, and that knowing has begun to bring others up the bluff road, not to harvest and not to threaten, but to ask, quietly, whether we might keep something of theirs too. We are becoming the place where the patterns of peoples are held safe against the long dark. I do not know yet what that will mean for the wardens who come after me. But I know it began the cold season. The harvesters came down out of the morning certain we were soft and warm and brief, and found instead that the soft, warm, brief world had spent an age learning the one thing they had forgotten, which is how to keep a thing and give it back. My grandfather taught me to read the glass before he taught me the alphabet, and he told me, the way old men tell you things you do not understand until much later, that a warden's whole art is in the difference between holding and owning. I understand it now. We held the unmaking of an entire people under our feet for one whole cold season, and we never once owned it, and that is the only reason any of us, them or us, are still ourselves this morning. The platforms still hang over Tessivar. The ring still throws down its second dawn, and the deep racks still sing, very low, the true names of a people who came to eat the world and went home wearing their own faces, kept clean by the larder for 60,000 years, against the morning they would need them.